Hello and welcome to Comedian's Paradise. This is the podcast where we speak to lots of intriguing and fascinating comics from across the globe that will help comedians like you and me find our own niche and live the comedy journey in an interesting, unique manner. Now, today's guest is an absolute comedy genius, all the way from New York. He's a man who's many of the best comics in the world. He is released a recent special on YouTube that you can watch, and it's an absolute pleasure to get on this podcast. He has this name of Matt, like Matt LeBlanc, the Friends actor. He has the surname of Ruby, which is a very famous Kaiser Chief song. Please welcome Matt Ruby.
Yay! Thanks for having me.
Did you like my intro, Matt?
Loved it. I'm gonna have to go find this Kaiser Chiefs song and give it a listen. I was unaware.
It's a song that sticks in my head. It's like the song goes da da da, and then they go Ruby Ruby Ruby.
I'll keep it in mind. Yeah, there's a few Ruby songs out there. Probably most famously Ruby Tuesday by the Stones, but yeah, I like that. The Matt LeBlanc. I'll always take a Joey reference. How you doing? Like that's a classic. Who can fight with that?
But I did not like the spin-off he produced. I thought that was
I don't
quite
think
poor.
anyone did. I don't think it lasted very long, but they did their best to try to milk that cow as much as they could.
And now Matt LeBlanc became a presenter for the British Top Gear and was crap. And that's all I remember of him. That's the only thing I remember of doing after since Friends.
Yeah, I didn't even know about that. That's tough when you're on one of those, hit TV shows like for that long. It's tough to ever play any other role, I think, because the world just constantly sees you as that guy.
Would you say that's the case? But in stand-up, it's not sort of like that, is it? In any way?
No, I mean, I think just like a sitcom or a TV show where you're in someone's home like every week for like, 5 to 10 years. It's just like now you are Walter White, you are Don Draper, you are Joey, you just become that person. So you really got to work hard to kind of make people see you as someone else and imagine you in different roles. I think it can be done. It just seems to be fairly hard. I feel like a lot of like these TV people are on hit shows afterwards have a tough time ever finding new roles that they can really sink their teeth into and that get traction.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, what's it called? Like Kevin Hart, he's sort of playing the same characters all the time, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he's in like every other commercial on TV in America, so I mean, I feel like that's mostly how I know him now.
Is he exactly like you see him on TV, or is this an NDA? I can't say what he's like off stage.
Yeah, I've never really hung out with him off stage, so I can't say for sure. But he seems to be a fairly consistent guy. I imagine like he seems pretty much the same in all aspects of his life.
Hmm. Is that? I mean, you're like you're sort of comic in New York as a whole. Sort of, they say that comedy started in New York, and there's so many sort of things that I hear from people. Like in the UK, comedy started from folk clubs, but I never quite like. I had a few Americans on the podcast, but I never quite got onto like how it all started. All I hear is people say stand-up comedy started in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a ton about the history. There's a guy named Cliff Nestoroff who I think has written a lot about like sort of the history of stand-up and stuff, and it has a book out that probably could explain it better than I can. But yeah, I think it was probably in the 50s, in that coffee shop scene as the folk music scene was coming up and coffee shop stuff, and people started performing jokes and sort of like whatever was happening in the Catskills, that sort of Borscht Belt comedy came. It was sort of how it bubbled up, and then you had people like Lenny Bruce and Mort Sahl and kind of taking it to a next level. And then after that, I think Carlin and Pryor and people like that really blew it up into more of a mainstream thing. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a very like New York, American sort of like iconic thing that I think bubbled up, around that era in like the 50s and 60s, and then kind of has spread ever since all over the place.
Hmm. It's so. Did you sort of start off all the way? You, I'm getting the feeling that you're someone that started in comedy in New York and you sort of went through it and you got to the place you are in now. or are you
Yes,
like a
that is
foreigner?
accurate. No, no, I began comedy in New York City, which I don't know if I necessarily advise. I think there's something to be said for starting somewhere a little bit smaller and getting some reps there and then coming to New York. But no, I began here, and yeah, been an interesting adventure.
Yeah, I spoke to what's it called, Nico White in a podcast, and like
Hmm.
when I spoke to him, he's a beast, man. Like he's like so smart and analytical, and like the amount of work you can tell he puts in, you can see he deserves to be where he is.
Yeah, Nico's great.
And I mean, I've read both of the articles. Like you're famous as well as the other guy is for writing two sort of Reddit articles that went viral.
Oh yeah.
What was what? So the famous article in stand up is what's it called? Hustle culture is killing comedy. And you saw that
Mhm.
article and you were like, no, listen up. If you don't put the work in, you don't get the results.
Yeah, I think there's truth to that. I mean, I think, we all wish we could like be on vacation all the time and just sort of relax into stuff, but like I'm just telling you what I'm seeing, which is the people who are the best at it are the ones who work the hardest. And that there's if you don't want to work hard, there's 100 people lined up behind you who are willing to make those sacrifices. And yeah, I think it's similar to, it's like, are you trying to just have a hobby or be, average, or are you trying to be like, are you pursuing greatness? Because then I think you get into the realm of like, an athlete who wants to be great, or someone who's trying to win an Olympic gold medal. It's like you don't really get to just train when you feel like it. You've got to be doing your reps all the time. So I think kind of if you want to be great at anything, I think it's going to be directly tied to how hard you work at it. I mean, I think that said, there's also, you need to stay sane. You need to have a life so you have something to talk about on stage, and you need to do whatever it takes to make it sustainable if you want to have a career. I think that, a lot of people burn out or don't last too long because of that. So I think you also, I think you need to work hard when you're trying to make stuff, but I think you also have to figure out some way to keep it sustainable over, decades if you want to have a career doing it for that long.
Is what you're saying effectively challenge yourself and making yourself uncomfortable and taking chances and pushing yourself? Is that what you get?
I mean, I think that's part of it too. I think, just working hard. I guess I don't know if working hard necessarily means being uncomfortable. I think it's just finding a way for you to make stuff sustainable and be able to do it over and over again. I do think, within the context of performing and writing new material, you do have to take chances, and you do, there sometimes you're going to bomb, but that's part of the process, and so I think there's also value in being willing to put yourself in like places that aren't always comfortable, or stretching your comfort zone. But I think they're all sort of related together in different ways.
I so one thing that I found I I've seen the people that I've seen really get far ahead are definitely sort of the hustlers, but also people that are very sort of likable and good at people. I think that,
Yep.
and they, what's the thing that I've noticed? Some people, but they're not necess. It's not always been the ones that have been the absolute funniest. Like there's some incredible comics that I come across where I look at them, quite a few of them, and I'm looking at them and like, you're bloody incredible. You're bloody amazingly good at it, but they don't put any work in or bother at it. Like I'll see them every time get on stage completely crushed, but they don't bother to smooth or get out there. But you see ones that are in between and like they're good, but they hustle, they go out there, they network, and they're very clever in what they do, and they get very far ahead. Like what's it called, Uncle Roger? He is very good. He's good at what he does, but he's definitely not the best that I've seen. I've seen so many people be way more talented than him, but when I speak to him, I see him. He's very smart in what he does. He puts a lot of work in, and that's why he is where he is today.
Yeah, I think definitely like who is important in all kinds of industries, not just comedy. But like, yeah, I think it's we don't have like an HR department or a hierarchy or some like natural like flow for how a career is supposed to go. So it definitely helps to, have a network of people and an alliance or a tribe or whatever word you want to use of like, people who you're going through it together and can help each other. I think definitely helps. And then if you're talking about like social media stuff, yeah, I think that's, then it helps too to have like if you come out with a special to have other people help promote it and get the word out and things like that, obviously that's helpful. And then even, doing podcasts and, having guesting on other people's and having people on yours and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think, all that stuff can help uh careers grow together, in a way that's obviously nice.
But so, with you being sort of on the New York scene, what are some sort of situations where you've been wowed by someone's work? Or like they've shown little things that have been like, my God, you really did that to go and get that bit, and then you saw the payoff of it.
I mean, I think, there's some people who are, routinely are doing like 4 or 5 sets a night and running all over the city and, or on the road, 40 weekends out of a year or things like that, which I think is like, to me, just like an impressive level of dedication to, it's really, you're turning your life over to stand up completely. And, I think, yeah, you can see the results when people are really immersed like that. So yeah, I think, probably just the amount of stage time, some people are pursuing and getting is the thing that impresses me most.
Well, one of the things, so I went to, I think this was around 5 or 6 years ago. I went to the New York comedy scene, and I did a lot of the mics over there. They were, I mean, one thing in London I found in the mics you get maybe 10 people there, but in New York, in each mic, it felt like you'd get bloody 20 or 30 people in there. And one of the things I found about it, it's very brutal and like your material has to be. I mean, there were very few that stuck out in each of the ones. Like I'd see 20 people do pretty shit, and then one that would do well. But it does play. And this is going to be something that I'm going to explain quite in detail. But one thing I've noticed in places like Singapore or like Malaysia, because it's a newer scene, they gain access quicker to tougher rooms, and maybe they're forced to learn how to play different rooms to a certain level. But if because it takes so long to get a certain point, does it is this because I noticed in New York all the gigs are just with comedians, whilst a lot of comedy shows in London there are ones with audiences, but there's a lot of bringer gigs. Um, what am I saying here? The thing, you've got to get to a certain level in New York to get those opportunities, but how much of it is you need those opportunities to get better?
Well, I mean, you definitely need opportunities to get better. You need
Like,
stage time. You need to get in front of real people. Open mics in New York City are particularly brutal. I'd say like elsewhere in America, you can go do open mics that do have like real audience members and could be more of like feel like a quote unquote real show. I think in New York you do have it's you. I mean, I haven't done open mics in a while, but at least when I was doing them, it's definitely like, a bunch of jaded, open mic comedians who don't really feel like laughing and don't even feel like paying attention. And so you're really just sort of, it's a tough crowd to get anything out of. So I think your main goal is to get in front of real people as soon as you can in any way you can, whether it's like producing your own show or doing something else. So you're not just relying on like a bunch of jaded comedians. Cause also sometimes a joke will work in a room full of comedians that when you do it in front of real people is not going to fly at all. So you gotta try to gauge your material from like the kind of audience that you're trying to hit.
but yeah, what would you say is the right balance of that of being like being toughened up to it and being ready to play the big rooms, but also making sure you're performing with real audiences?
I mean, I'd say get in front of real audiences as soon as you can and as much as you can. I think, mics are great for like, sort of like, I guess when I started out doing mics in New York, it was like, okay, there was like a circuit of different ones you could do on different nights of the week. You try to write like 5 new minutes a week and go out and do that material. You hope to get like maybe one good bit or something out of it, and then you try to get on a book show that has a real audience, then do that material, the best of that material that you've been working on. And so the mics was a good workshop. Also, it was a good way to meet other people, like kind of like what you were saying before. It's sort of like, I think that's sometimes people have this mistaken idea that they need to like find someone who's like way far ahead of them and try to be buddy buddy with them or kiss their ass or something. Whereas like really sometimes I think the best value is like finding the other people who are at, you know, the same level or a little bit ahead of you, who you think are talented or dedicated, and trying to, you know, bond together with them and you know, kind of rise up together. And I think mics can be valuable in that way for finding the other people who are serious or who you think have potential and trying to, you know, um, grow alongside them. So I think it could be valuable in that way. But yeah, and also I think it's like New York is a special animal. So I can only speak to the experience I've had here, whereas in other places it might be fine to, you know, just be sticking on the mic circuit for a while. And you know, I think every, you know, everyone's got their own path, and every place probably has a
Yeah,
different
yeah.
path that works best.
What have you found? How does New York prepare you for other gigs in other parts of the country as opposed to any other city?
I mean, the nice thing here is like, especially if you're doing clubs in New York, there's a lot of tourists there. So it's almost a little bit of like a preview of what it's like to be on the road, because, you know, you could do a show where there's, you know, some New Yorkers and some people from California and some from Tennessee, and they're, you know, you're just kind of trying to find what's relatable to all of them. So I think New York definitely helps you out in that way. And then I just think, you know, it's so competitive here that, you know, you've got to bring your A game. You've got to like write jokes. You got to have material. And I think, you know, the best comedians in the world are here in New York. And so if you can hold your own, you know, on a showcase show with 5 other like top-notch New York comedians, then when you do go somewhere else to, you know, perform, usually you feel like you've got that confidence, and you know you're going to be able to bring a high level quality show in a way that, like, you know, people from other cities aren't always able to do, I guess.
What what's been a situation that's really amazed you recently, where you've seen like a comic bomb for like 5 minutes, they've been able to like turn it around into something incredible? Because I heard a story about Russell Hicks where he was bombing for 10 minutes, but he for the rest of the 10 minutes he won them over and had a storming set.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any recent memory of someone turning a bomb around. Um, I mean, I think the funniest quote unquote bomb set I saw recently was it was at a new room that I'd never been to before, and the comic before me went on stage, and within a minute he was like furious at this whole table for just like looking at their phones. He's like, "We're doing a show here. I can't believe you're all looking at your phones," and he's like, "This is ridiculous." And after 2 minutes, he just walked off stage, and I was and I was on next, and I went up and I was like, "Yeah, what's going on with all the phone stuff?" And they were like, there was like the QR codes on the table, and the only way they could order was via the QR code. And so they were just like doing what the venue had told them to do, which is obviously like a bad match for comedy. Like, so clearly someone had thought out how to do this show, but to me it was just amusing to have this comedian be like, what the hell are you guys doing, just all in your phones? It's so lame. And then them being like, it's the only way for us to order a drink. We don't know how else what else we're supposed to do. So a QR casualty, I guess.
Hmm. But I mean, they're great. They're great. I mean, for the Edinburgh shows, I'm definitely using them. I mean, if I want, make think give people it's like with trying to have sex. Give people make it enough easier for them to make an excuse to do it.
I mean, I guess I'm a
I
fan
don't
of
know.
I'm a fan of paper menus if I can get one. Like anytime I prefer to not look at my phone and not use my phone. And so when people are like, "You must take out your phone and it's the only way to interact with me," I'm like, "Well, all right. I prefer humanity if we're still allowed to do that."
But I do. I loved all the QR things. I had what's it called? A comic called Jeff Joe, and like he come in and straight away after I get gigged him a few times, straight away he gets the pop. What's that thing called? The pop thing, where they have the little circle at the back where you get lots of followers.
I don't know.
But yeah, he was really pushing for people to follow him, whilst the rest of us were just sat down there, just chilling, not really going there. But he's like, yeah, that's I see that a lot with a lot of American comics that come over to London. Like you, straight away, you're out there.
It's a good idea. I got to get on that. I need a QR code.
Is there? I heard from like clowns that I know in New York that there's a like from Nico told me that there's lots of different kind of rooms. Like there's the black rooms, the Latin rooms, there's the mainstream rooms. But I also heard from like clowns that there's an alternative circuit that's building up in New York. Am I right in hearing that?
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. I think, you get a little bit more of that in Brooklyn. There's a bunch of like alt shows or whatever you want to call them. At smaller rooms, there's a bunch of bar shows, and then you have the clubs. So yeah, there's definitely a wide range of types of venues.
Is if you're an alternative act but you're funny, but all you're doing is, I don't know, doing a kite impression, would that likely, if you're being honest, affect your bookability at certain places in New York?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you're doing a kite impression and you're just up at like, a comedy club in front of a bunch of tourists, they're going to be like, what the hell is this? And also, if you're like, some guy who just does crowd work with like tourists, and then you go to like some hip Brooklyn room, that probably wouldn't go well either. So it's sort of, finding your right audience, I guess. Not everyone needs to be right for every room at every time. I think there's also something to be said for like, hey, this is what I do. This is the kind of crowd I'm trying to hit. That's not the right space for me, and knowing that too.
Has there been a moment where you've seen a comic and you're like, how the fuck did this work? But it's brilliant. Like someone did something completely ridiculous. I don't know, as you said, do a kite impression, but like it was brilliant and it completely killed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great like late night set that Nick Vatterott did years ago that where he pulls out this giant set list, and I remember seeing him work on it like in at small bar shows and stuff, and he'd just pull out this like 10-foot tall, he acts in the middle of his set like he forgot what to do next, and he pulls out like a 10-foot tall set list that like helps make sense of everything else he had done at that point. And like to me that was just like a really creative kind of different take on what you can bring to stand up. Brent Weinbach's a guy who does lots of cool stuff in that vein too. So I think there used to be a little bit more bandwidth for like weird stand up and character based stuff and things that were a little more out there. It seems like there's been a little bit of a compression of now people. It feels like there's more of like everyone's doing sort of more of like the standard type, comedy, and there's less of that weird stuff going on. But I also think it's out there. You just might have to search it out more.
So, can I show you a little clip? And I want to see your thoughts in it.
Sure.
Do you have any gong shows in New York? So this is a famous comedy show in London where they get. But this is what he does. That's all he did, but he just stormed it. And that's all he. So there's a famous, notorious show in London called the King Gong Show, where comedians try and do 5 minutes without getting gonged off by the audience, and 3 audience members get cards that they have to lift up. And nearly every comic I've seen that has done well in that, I've done sort of short one-liners, whilst he just did that and he completely stormed it. It was incredible to see. What are your thoughts on that? What you saw there?
I mean, I think it's funny. I mean, also it's like when you're doing a gong show type thing, it's already like a gimmicky sort of I don't know, like the entire framework is shifted of like, okay, what can you do in 30 seconds or whatever that's really going to grab them. So, I think that's a creative, interesting, sort of slapsticky way to approach it. So yeah, I mean, I'd be curious, like, I don't know what else he does or if he has jokes or other material, if that's just his whole shtick, but like within the context of what you just showed me, sure, that's fun. Why not?
One of the one of the things that I found, I went to the Comedy Cellar a while ago, and it was bloody incredible. I saw Andrew Schultz do
Yep.
he's got that famous routine about building the pyramids.
Hmm.
That was absolutely amazing. And one thing I found quite interesting about being in the Comedy Cellar was at the end of the show, they you didn't pay for a ticket, but you had to pay at the end of the show. And I was just thinking, if I brought in 20 people with me, and if it was a big gang, we could maybe force our way out without paying.
Well, they don't let groups of 20 in together, so
I don't know, of
that'd be
course.
your foil your plan.
Oh,
And also
damn.
also they got some pretty big security guys there, so I don't know if I'd want to get on their wrong side. They might be onto you. Someone might have tried this
Damn it!
before.
Oh God! But what has your being experience like? Like, do you have any insider gossip of the Comedy Cell as a whole, as an outsider?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the best comedy club in the world. It's I think a big part of it is like the audiences are really excited to be there, so that creates like a really fun, like energetic dynamic. You and as a comedian, there's a lot of pressure on you to like bring your A game. You don't want to like just phone it in when you're there or putz around. You're there to like do your best material and kill as much as you can. And yeah, I mean, I think it's always a good vibe there, and like I think from a comedian perspective, it's also like always a great hang, because you can like just sort of chill in the upstairs restaurant or around the corner and like kind of have some drinks with other comics. So I think from a comedian perspective, that's a big part of it too. Of it's like kind of like a meeting place and somewhere to go where you're gonna know a bunch of people all the time.
It, what so? What's the table with with all the big names like with Louis C.K. and what's it called? They talk about the famous table with Patrice O'Neill, Bill
Yeah.
Burr, and
Yeah, it's just a table upstairs at Olive Tree in the back where comics sit. It's not like a magical table. It's not a so who's Sir Arthur? What was the guy's name with the sword you got to pull out? There's no magic to the actual table. It's just like a place where good comedians gather and shoot the shit. So that's the fun part about it.
what's what's been what would be your what has been the maddest thing you've seen at the cellar?
Hmm. Um, I guess Russell Crowe was at one of my shows, and so that was fun to meet him afterwards. So I don't know if that counts as mad, but yeah, I think sometimes just in the crowd, there's like people you recognize or athletes or something like that. So I think just sometimes that can be like an interesting dynamic. Um, but I don't know. I think I'm usually in like, stand up mode. I'm there to tell jokes and do my job. And, I'm just more focused on that. And like, sometimes it'll just be crazy, like who shows up. Like there was, one show where it was like Chris Rock and Amy Schumer and Jerry Seinfeld and Dave Chappelle. And you're like, well, this is insane that all these people just showed up on like one show. Like, and imagine these people who just bought tickets to a random comedy show and got that as a surprise. So I think just sometimes that element can be uh something you forget how weird that is if you're there.
Were you in between? Were you in between like Amy Schumer?
No, no, I was on a different show. It was just noteworthy that all of them showed up to do the same show.
Hmm. What's something that so you get a lot of comics from all the world coming to New York, but what's something that maybe irritates you about comics coming in from outside and their sort of assumptions of New York as a whole? What's an assumption about New York that you think's what the where did you get this from? Apart from everything I've said now, but
um I don't know. Maybe it's just might be more of like if people come in and like there's sort of material that we think of as hack, like making fun of the subway announcer or, you know, things like that, that like as a New York comic, you kind of have heard a ton of times before. So you're like, okay, stay away from this. But then sometimes people will come in from other places and be like, oh, I've got a fresh take on this subway joke. And you're like, do you? Because there's been a lot of takes on this already. So I think maybe that can be something that occasionally gets people into trouble. And yeah, I don't know. I think, overall, though, I mean, it's like usually, to me, it's interesting sometimes when it's like some comedian who you don't know at all, and you're watching them, and then like afterwards, you find out like, oh, this guy's got like 800,000 like followers in Brazil or India or somewhere else, and you didn't even know that he's like some huge person where he comes from, but he's just here in New York trying to like, you know, I don't want to say start over from scratch, but like do whatever he does back home here and see how that goes. So I think that could be like an interesting dynamic for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? It's and what's been something that's what's been a funny instance that you've seen with someone from another country coming to New York?
Um, I don't know if there's like Gad Elmaleh, who's from France, is interesting because he's like plays arenas and stuff, in France and coming to New York and just performing in a small club, and I think it's just interesting to see that dynamic. Um, and English obviously isn't his first language, and he's trying to do stand up in English, and just seeing someone who clearly is like talented and a huge star where he comes from come over and try to make that transition, I think was interesting. And you can also how much like so he's someone who's a very gifted physical performer too, so watching someone like that be like, okay, maybe I don't speak this language perfectly, but like I'll lean even more on the physicality of my performance and trying to get laughs through my body language and act outs and things like that. So I think that was something that stuck with me in my head.
Hmm. Yeah. And what so you've gigged in sort of different parts of the world, and you said you gigged a little bit in London for a while. Did you notice any sort of differences between what the audience is like in London and New York from your short stays?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a joke by joke basis. I don't know if I was like, oh, in London they love relationship material, and in New York they love political material or something like that. I think it just more reveals sort of like what stuff you have that's like universal and relatable to anyone in any culture versus like, oh, this joke is relying on some specific cultural reference that's like Americans are going to know about, but they're not going to know about, somewhere else. And I think just sometimes that's what's revealed when you're performing in other countries. Is just sort of like, oh, right, you don't know what I'm talking about right now. So like just sort of, but sometimes you don't even realize it until you're in the middle of a bit, and you can kind of just tell the audience doesn't even know really what you're referring to, and you're like, oh yeah, that's a pretty American thing. Got it. Okay, so I think the more you can perform overseas, the more you probably figure that out.
And for anyone that's sort of looking at the podcast now and they want to find out about Ruby, what would be a unique piece of advice you would give to any comic looking to start now?
Well, I think what you can do with social media now is so crazy and opens up. Yeah, I think if you want to be a great comedian, the path that everyone was doing 5, 10, or 15 years ago, I think still applies, of getting on stage and performing as much as you can. I do think now what you can do on social media is like bypass so much of the gatekeepers and like industry stuff, and just sort of connect directly with an audience that likes your stuff. So I think just being creative with what you do there, and just sort of using that as a testing ground of like, okay, what's hitting, what's working, what is sort of like letting an audience tell you what's the right stuff for you to be producing, because I think that can be in the beginning stages challenging when it's tough to find an audience for your live sets. Like I think trying to make more stuff on social media can be a good way to kind of throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks.
And if you were to start your comedy journey now, is there anything that you've changed from the past that you would have changed if you were to start now?
Hmm. I mean, I think podcasting earlier. I think you just sort of see how the people who moved quickly and were first movers on sort of new technology and new things that were coming up really reap the benefits of that. So I think being more willing to dive into new stuff right away to find an audience would probably be good. I also think I can personally, I can be like a little bit of a lone wolf who's like doing my own thing. And so I think the more uh you know the more effort I could have put in or continue to put into, like, just sort of like supporting the comedians around me who I enjoy and am, friendly with, and trying to be more connected. So you're part of a community, I think, is a valuable thing.
Okay. And for anyone that's sort of listening, and they want to find out about what you're about, where do they find out about you? Do they find out about you on eBay, on Amazon? Where do they find out about you?
I mean, I guess you could check my eBay past purchases. That seems like a strange way to do it, but yeah, I mean, mattrubycomedy.com has like all my stuff. I've got a new special called Substance, which is on YouTube. If you go to YouTube/Matt Ruby, it's a special where I perform 4 sets, one high, one drunk, one on shrooms, and one sober, with documentary stuff leading up to each one of those sets, and it gets pretty wild. And is that just came out a few weeks ago and is doing great and getting good feedback. So and then I also have another special before that called Feels Like Matt Ruby, which is also on YouTube, and a couple albums you can listen to. And I have a couple newsletters that I write, one called the Rubes Letter and one called Funny How. And the Rubes Letter is like essays and jokes and videos, and Funny How is more about like the craft of stand-up. So if your audience has like aspiring stand-up comedians, that can be a good newsletter to check out. So that's mattruby.substack.com or funnyhow.substack.com. And you just go to mattrubycomedy.com and you can find links to all that stuff.
And I'm going to ask one little question. With the Funny How, what do you look at? Do you look at the set structure, like how they act, like the fixed points, the body language, the gestures, the tonations?
I mean, it's not really like necessarily like evaluating a comedian's set in that way. It's more sort of like the craft of comedy. Like, how does Jerry Seinfeld write? Or what did Chris Rock say in an interview about like how important it is to listen to the audience? Or what's the right way to craft a set according to some famous comedian? Or here's how Norm Macdonald tells a joke. So sort of, I guess, looking at comedians who I find inspirational, or people who are like kind of masters of the craft, and like looking at them and how they do stuff, and what can you learn from it as a younger comedian.
Aspiring comic, yeah. Breaking down the science behind it.
A little bit, yeah.
Oh, well, you've heard about Matt Ruby. You know where to find out about him. And if you like this episode, share it with your friends. If you didn't, make sure this episode is out of your existence. Don't tell anyone. Don't leave any reviews. This didn't exist, all right?